Go. All right. I'm really delighted that Dr. Sijia made the trip up to join us live today here at Cal State San Bernardino as part of the Modern China Lecture Series. Dr. Yao is Assistant Professor of Chinese Language and Culture at Soka University of America, down in Orange County, Aliso Viejo, right? Just down, but it's still quite a drive. So it's really nice that we're really lucky to have her join us in person. Dr. Yao earned her PhD in comparative literature from Purdue University. Prior to joining Soka University, she was Associate Professor of Practice, Chinese Studies Department, Modern Languages and Literatures at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and held a number of other posts prior to that. The book under discussion today is Cosmopolitan Love, Utopian Vision, D.H. Lawrence, Eileen Chang, Eileen, from University of Michigan Press, released kind of hot off the press in academic terms, we can still say, just last year. Professor Yao has earned a number of remarkable commendations and grants and awards from Harvard University, from the University of Nebraska, from her home PhD institution of Purdue, and the Jiang Jinghua Foundation. Will be here for a long time. If I were to list all of her impressive awards and her publications, suffice it to say that in addition to this book, she has a number of remarkable articles. She's a popular teacher at Soka University, teaching both Chinese language and also Sinophone cinema, among other topics, including cultural history of China. So there's a lot that we have to talk about. I'm very, very excited to hear from Professor Yao. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Yao.
Thank you, John. Thanks for the kind words about me. And it's also a great pleasure and also honor to join this Modern China series. I know this lecture series has been a long time and have been inviting so many famous scholars in our field. So thanks for having me today. It's very nice to be on campus today. It's such a not so hot day.
Yeah, finally.
It's a good day and cloudy. Thanks for joining this talk, everybody on Zoom. And today my topic is drawn from my book, as Jeremy already introduced, Cosmopolitan Law, Utopian Vision, D.H. Lawrence and Eileen Chang. The main topic today is actually kind of want to introduce very quickly about this first chapter. The main topic is the incest prohibition in Eileen Chang's The Heart Sutra, in Chinese called Xinji, and D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers. So first, I want to give you a kind of outline. So the outline here, I have a very quick introduction about the third term comparison. That is a new comparative mode that I'm trying to propose in this book, the third term comparison. And then talking about the comparison of Eileen Chang and D.H. Lawrence. And then the idea of cosmopolitan love and then the one case study, which is incest prohibition, that is drawn from chapter 1 of the book. So let's have the next slide. So this is the third term comparison that is pretty much argue that we should kind of using this way of comparison to challenge the binary thinking between China and the West. Using a kind of a purpose. So the inherent intention of comparing determines what I call the third term comparison method, which establishes at the outset a purpose that enables the concentration on two texts from two very distinctive cultural contexts, reestablishing and reshaping relationships. The third term allows us to investigate the text in its relationship to its own tradition and then to compare those two relationships to each other. So as a comparative mode that I'm proposing, it begins with the definition of a purposive basis of comparison, in this case, cosmopolitan love, which allows us to see how a particular vision of love develops in different ways in China and the West. So now the idea of cosmopolitan love seems contradictory. Cosmopolitanism is a political project of creating citizens of the world, while love is primarily a private feeling. Yet cosmopolitan and love are linked because cosmopolitanism is about building relationships, and love defines the finest form of human relationship. As a result, cosmopolitan love can mean that cosmopolitan relationships are best established upon the basis of love. Unfortunately, it is impossible to establish cosmopolitanism simply by universally loving one another as global citizens. Bonds of love are specific and can't be extended willy-nilly to all of humanity all at once. So if cosmopolitanism is linked to love, it would have to be through the gradual mediation of our immediate private loves. Could there possibly be a way in which our private loves might be cosmopolitan?
Right, but
In order to answer this question, it is easier to start with the opposite. That is, what kind of love would not be cosmopolitan? Closing off any relationship to something foreign and distant. Here, the answer is obvious. Incestuous love, which rejects the foreign. If incest is anti-cosmopolitan, the incest prohibition is a fundamentally cosmopolitan rule. Thus, in order to imagine a cosmopolitan love, we should begin with analyzing incest prohibition, understood as the command that we love a stranger. The incest prohibition as the only universally held human rule defines human culture as fundamentally cross-cultural. Yet the prohibition also embodies a basic contradiction between the local and the foreign in human existence. We have a natural inclination toward what we have known, but the survival of human culture requires that we abandon the familiar in order to find love elsewhere. Thus, forcing children to take the first step away from their own parents and the local culture that they embody. By compelling children to seek a mate elsewhere than within the confines of the familial, the incest prohibition links the local with the foreign, encouraging the cosmopolitan sensibility that is essential to the reproduction of humankind. By forcing us to subordinate our instinctual desires to the following of a general rule, the incest prohibition compels us to suppress our immediate sexual desires in order to pursue a long-term relationship. As the suppression of individual desires, the incest prohibition establishes morality. In so doing, it establishes an opposition between desire and love, in which love involves self-restraint. The incest prohibition is thus the requirement of every morality and of every true love. When the incest prohibition is too weak to control incestuous desire, foundation of humanity is undermined and dismantled both morally and affectively, leading to a regressive humanity and barrenness, physical and cultural reproduction. However, the incest prohibition that compels children to love strangers does not mean a blanket rejection of the past and of the familiar. Every marriage brings two families together, and this process does not involve negation of the familiar in favor of something global. Rather, marriage is the beginning of an interaction between two family traditions. Consequently, our approach to cosmopolitan love and the incest prohibition can't involve rejection of past traditions in favor of a new universal culture. Analogically, in order to link the familiar and the foreign, we need to engage a process of comparison. Because the incest prohibition is a moral rule and morality is a cultural phenomenon, our consideration of the incest prohibition must be based on comparison. especially between two very distinctive cultural systems, like China and the West. A comparison opens up a critical perspective that can transcend itself by taking a position above familiar, in the contrast with the foreign, thereby reaching a cosmopolitan vision. This vision is not constructed by establishing a universal culture, but by comparing two traditions with each other. Every culture has its incest prohibition, but each culture manages it in a different way. When one specific narrative incest is mistaken for something universal, we risk losing sight of the structuring character of the incest prohibition as a moral rule that is fundamentally cultural. Unfortunately, our understanding of incest has been dominated by a school of thought that stems from the Freudian interpretation, which believes in the primacy of incestual desire rather than of the incest prohibition. Freud's Oedipus complex, which reduces incest to a universal structure of desire defined by a single narrative taken from an ancient Greek tragedy, belongs to a modernization and secularization process in which globalization means modernization. By seeing all incest as a case of a natural childhood desire to sleep with the mother and kill the father, Freud's homogenizing scientific approach subsumes all incest within the Oedipus complex. By presuming that child psychology is everywhere the same, it takes this Oedipus psychology to be a single narrative of incest. This method, therefore, establishes an imperialist approach to incest by imposing a specific case as the universal. This method also mistakenly presumes the primacy of incestuous desire, thereby overlooking the fact that it is the incest prohibition that creates incestuous desire. My approach to cosmopolitanism on the country sheds light on local specificities by focusing on incest prohibition rather than incestuous desire. Morality rather than instinct. Love rather than desire. As we look at specific stories of incest, we find that parental culture, not infantile desire, is the basis of every example of incest. If this is the case, the problem of incest projects a cultural problem that demands a comparison to understand. So here we have a consideration of details of two stories of incest written by H. Lawrence and Eileen Chang can illuminate the specificities and variations in the structuring of incestuous desire and its prohibition that Freud overlooks. If Freud interprets incest as conforming to a universal ethical dynamic that originates from children, Eileen Chang and H. Lawrence reverse the perspective by recognizing parents and the local culture as the main drivers of incestuous desire. The critique of the transgressive love between parents and the child is in both writers leads to a liberation not only from the local but also from the hegemonic secular discourse of science, in this case, the global spread of Freudian. So D.H. Lawrence, a son of a working class miner, lived in a period of transition from the conventions of the Victorian era to a modern time that witnessed the technological and industrial advancements that bred geopolitical tensions and eventually led to the First World War. Dissatisfied with a limited national vision, he was always on the move from England, Germany, Italy, Switzerland to Australia, the United States, New Mexico, and France. His love stories, Sons and Lovers, Women in Love, Lady Chatterley's Lovers, etc., moved from private to public spheres in developing a social critique of England and the West with a cosmopolitan vision. Eileen Chang, also Zhang Ailin, an outstanding Chinese woman writer, presented Chinese heterosexual love roughly 30 years later when she witnessed the old world rotting and dying Simultaneously, the desperate move from political chaos and Sino-Japanese war toward an enlightened, modern China. Born in a distinguished aristocratic family in 1920 China, Eileen Chang was caught in two worlds, the traditional Chinese and the modern Western one. In the 1940s, Eileen Chang won a large audience in Shanghai. Nevertheless, she was never considered as a serious writer because her works deal with women and love, topics that Chinese critics considered decadent and trivial. Pursuing her literary autonomy, she left Shanghai for Hong Kong in 1952 and migrated to the United States in 1955, hoping to become a successful world-class writer. She became a migrant writer the rest of her life and then submerged in gray oblivion in the United States. Published in 1913, Sons and Lovers is Lawrence's semi-autobiography. Like Lawrence himself, Paul Morrell is born in a miner's family, a family filled with poverty, violence, and painful domestic quarrels. The problematic marital relation of Paul's parents directly leads to his mother's obsession with her son and Paul's strong fixation on his own mother. This excessive mother-son love impedes Paul from developing any connection with other women when he reaches manhood. The Heart Sutra, Xinjing, Eileen Chang's short story published in 1943, represents a similar, even more transgressive incestuous love. After 20's birthday, Xiao Han is anxious about losing the love of her father, Xu Fengyi. She emotionally attaches herself. Can we have the second? Next slide.
Oh, okay.
Here I'm just giving some examples about the ideas of love in both Lawrence and Eileen Chang. It's very interesting to see how they perceive love very similar. Like they both value love and perceiving love not just private, but also kind of in contrast or in the context of this political and social transformation in their own culture, how this private love is actually so important in their times. So let's have this next slide. And I have here, just in case some folks don't know about the novel and Xinjing. So the characters, we have Dietrich Lawrence, Sons and Lovers, Gertrude Morrell and Paul Morrell, mother and the son, and Xu Fengyi and Xu Xiaohan, the daughter and the father. So it's like a biological father. It's not like Sammy. It's actually like really direct incestuous desire in there. I'm going to argue is instead of focusing on incestuous desire in these two works, actually I'm focusing on the incest prohibition. That is usually overlooked and the source of the desire. So Xu Xiaohan emotionally attaches herself to Xu Fengyi and excludes amorous relationships with boys. She cruelly manipulates sincere admirers of hers and uses him as a means to gain her father's attention. She also despises and even spitefully challenges her mother, who is amiable, lovable, and traditional housewife. Xiaohan's problems are reciprocated, however, since Fengyi loves his daughter more than he should. Paul's mother never threatens him sexually, but Xu Fengyi has an affair with Xiaohan's friend, who looks like Xiaohan, to escape from his incestuous desire for his own daughter. Here, the father's incestuous desire prevents him from properly loving his daughter. So I'm going to skip the pre-modern Chinese incest narrative of incest. It's actually very rich, like Jin Pingmei, the Hong Lou Meng, the story of the stone. We all have this kind of pseudo-incestuous desire in there. But I want to argue here is the Heart Sutra is the first Chinese story that directly reveals the incestuous desire between a daughter and her biological father. Eileen Chang was the first writer who openly expressed the incestuous impulse in semi-colonial Shanghai, while Lawrence was the first who perceptively reflected upon the complex mother-son issue in modern England. It is easy to identify the kinship between Lawrence's Sons and Lovers and Eileen Chang's The Heart Sutra with the kind of family romance Freud describes, and critics starting from Alfred Kuttner, Daniel Weiss, Frederick Hoffman, and Shirley Pankin have investigated Lawrence's novel in light of Freudian. After reading Alfred Kuttner's article, Lawrence took offense, quote, "I hated the psychoanalysis review of Sons and Lovers, my poor book. It was as art, a fairly complete truth. So they carve a half lie out of it and say, voila, swine." So yeah, he doesn't like the very oversimplifying, using Freud to interpret the stories. Lawrence started writing Sons and Lovers in 1910 when Freud, for the first time, offered the term Oedipus complex. Lawrence and Freud very likely began their investigations at the same time, but set up two distinctive analyses about the same tabooed subject. Lawrence rejects Freud's scientific way that standardizes the unconscious. In Parent Love, one of Lawrence's essays, Lawrence posits that a normal parent-child love is rooted in an unhealthy husband-wife relationship. In this essay, Lawrence also provides a detailed analysis about how failed marriages push women to devour their sons. However, if the husband fails to shoulder responsibility and require maturity, the love craving, this is from Lawrence, will drive the wife into, quote, frenzy and disaster. The result is that the wife seeks, quote, fulfillment in the deep, passionate self, end quote. Consequently, the wife will shift her need for love to her children, leading to the extreme intensity of incestuous desire to mother and son that disturbs and deranges the son's, quote, sympathetic voluntary system, and leads to his frustration, even perversion. Accordingly, Lawrence is aware of the flaws in heterosexual relations in British society. The husband's failure to implement his responsibility and the wife's unsatisfied need for love both lead to the young man's inability to love formally. In the novel, Lawrence illustrates how the husband's alcoholism, violence, and irresponsibility compel the wife's love to shift towards her sons and eventually to cause its insurmountable attachment to the mother. Different from Freud, who blames incestuous desire on the child's Oedipus complex, Lawrence details the experience of an incestuous desire resulting from a deep dysfunctional family and the weakening of the incest prohibition on the part of the parents. Lawrence, therefore, culturally contextualizes the situation of incest. Lawrence's observation illustrates the problems of heterosexual relations embedded in Western modern culture, while Eileen Chang's depiction of the incestual desire between a Chinese daughter and her father exposes the weakening of the incest prohibition, which is disguised by a traditional Chinese morality of filial piety. The Freudian Oedipus complex does not influence the colonized writer to the extent that Franco Moratti presumes in his notion of wave. Rather, it merely triggered and found affinities with China's unconsciousness. A year earlier than the Heart Sutra, Eileen Chang wrote an essay, Demons and Fairies, in which she acutely points out the profound link between suppressed passion and filial piety in traditional Chinese culture. She writes, quote, the preoccupation with parental remains can be explained by the normal development of filial sentimentality in China. The Chinese demand that filial affection be a grand consuming passion, and since it is the only legitimate passion, it achieves heroic proportion. Eileen Chang believes that filial piety has abnormally developed into a kind of sentimentality equal to lovers' passion. She continues in this essay, quote, a study of the behavior of model sons who, with the fervor of cannibalistic self-sacrifice, cut pieces of flesh from their thighs to make a medicinal soup for sick parents, shows them to be people madly in love. There's a close link between the abnormal passion and filial affection, but Chinese Confucians justified this abnormal and distorted passion between parents and children as a grand and heroic virtue. The Heart Sutra, therefore, is Eileen Chang's continued fictional exploration of this distorted passion in the disguise of filial piety, in Chinese called xiao. Filial piety, xiao, is one of the four major virtues highly valued by Confucian society and practiced in every Chinese person's lived experience. Numerous pieces of classical Chinese literature praise this noble merit, and one can easily provide some quick examples. A modern reader may sense something peculiar about the extreme passion of filial piety in the classical folk stories. For instance, in the Han Dynasty, a girl named Cao Luo was drowned after jumping into the river to retrieve her father's dead body. This real story was recorded in the classical literature, and we can easily draw its connection to Eileen Chang's comment about the Chinese obsession with parental remains, as I just mentioned. Cao Luo has been respected as the most filial daughter. However, her incomprehensible attachment to her father is tantamount to a lover's passion. This passion reminds us of numerous love tragedies in traditional Chinese texts, such as the butterfly lovers, and the story of the stone, in which the young hero or heroine dies of heartbreak due to the separation from the lover. In 孔雀东南飞 the Peacock's Southeast Flew, a Yue poem of the 3rd century AD, the mother's irrational obsession with her son forces the son to divorce his beloved wife. It has been a lasting tradition for sons to have a deep piety towards their mothers, while the mothers hold grudges and are jealous towards the daughters-in-law in Chinese culture. This incomprehensible passion for the opposite sex parents existed in classical Chinese literature, but had been muted and misinterpreted as merely filial piety. As the only outlet Chinese people have in order to release their surplus passion, the excessive affection between parent and child actually covers and hides an eccentric passion. One can easily find evidence of this incestuous passion in the Heart Sutra. In this scandalous yet rarely studied story, the passionate daughter could very easily be recognized as the source of the transgressive father-daughter love. She refuses to grow up in order to stay close with her father when her friend Lin Qing asks Xiao Han facetiously, quote, "Are you by any chance planning to remain a child for your entire life?" Quote. Xiao Han responds, quote, "And what if I stayed at home and spent my entire life playing the child? I don't see who in my family would dare to stop me," end quote. So Xu Xiaohan is determined to stay with her parents forever, which reminds us of the aforementioned filial excess. She would gently slide, quote, her finger up and down along her father's nose, end quote. When she finds her father having an affair with Lin Qing, Xiaohan is exasperated like a jealous wife and tries desperately to destroy this love affair. However, the salient feature of the filial passion from a daughter is actually derived from her father's incestuous desire. When Xiaohan explicitly shows that no one in her family would be able to stop her from playing the child and staying forever with the parents, it indicates a sign of weakened moral prohibition in the family. Later, Feng Yi secretly has an affair with Lin Qing, who has the same age and looks like Xiao Han. Lin Qing, as the surrogate, fulfills Feng Yi's incestuous desire for Xiao Han. So, holding a stronger passion than Paul's mother, Feng Yi loves Xiao Han as his daughter in the beginning, but this love is overtaken by an incestuous desire that he fails to prohibit. So, can we have the next slide? So, this is a blog quote from the story. One day when Xiao Han is standing outside the window, through the glass, Feng Yi's hand pressed against Xiao Han's arm, an ivory brown arm. Her robe was a beautiful flower patterned bells trimmed in red lacquer, on which the blue heads and fair faces of children were printed. The numerous children wriggled between his fingers. Xiao Han, that big, lovable child with lustrous beauty, a big ivory-fleshed child. Feng Yi withdrew his hand violently as if he were burned by fire. His face changed color, and he turned around so as not to look at her. To the close view. Okay. So this filial affection grows from childhood year by year to a transgressive passion and eventually turns drastically into a disastrous desire. As in Paul's case, the mutual affection between father and the daughter in Chang's story goes far beyond the one-way incestuous desire of the daughter for the father, predicted by Freudian psychoanalytic theory. The father starts his parental love in the beginning, but it is gradually replaced by the incestuous desire that strongly influences the daughter, who can't find a way to channel the passion except through the idea of filial love, and is thus unable to focus on a love outside of the family. Since the incestuous situation does not result from the daughter's desire, but the father's, the primary problem in the story is a moral one, in which the father succumbs to his desire and he consequently fails to enforce the incest prohibition. Its deterioration does not arise from the child's desire, but from the failure of parents to enforce this prohibition upon themselves in order to allow the children to be able to develop a love outside the family. So, reaching to the conclusion, Lawrence's mother-son incestuous desire illustrates an alternative narrative of a deep cultural problem in the West that also drew attention from Freud. As opposed to Freud, Lawrence pins the source of the incestuous desire to the parents rather than the children, thus indicating a deep cultural problem in the modern West. Likewise, Eileen Chang's depiction of the incestuous desire between a Chinese daughter and her father indicates that the source of the problem is the father who fails to hold onto the incest prohibition. The problem of the family can be extended to the problem of the parental culture that demands a passionate filial piety embedded in traditional Chinese culture. The discourse of filial piety, a lasting morality, contributes to the weakening of the incest prohibition, the first morality of humanity. There seems to be a fundamental contradiction between the morality of the incest prohibition and the morality of filial piety. Filial piety can be used as a pretext for the overemphasis on the bond to the parents, leading to the deterioration of incest prohibition. The relaxing of the incest prohibition creates an obsession with the familiar rather than the foreign. Just as Feng Yi and Gertrude are both obsessed with their own desires, their families remained obsessed with themselves and unable to look beyond their own horizon. Such a family dysfunction projects a deep cultural problem, decline of morality in the parental culture. The stories demonstrate that the maintenance of the moral order embodied in the incest prohibition is the prerequisite for the ability to create new bonds with the foreign. The ability to engage with the foreign is in turn the basis for cosmopolitanism. We have been told that a globalized society needs to break down cultural boundaries and flatten out the local specificities, for instance, through economic globalization and Freud's claim of a universal Oedipus complex. However, both Lawrence and Chang argue that the foundation of cosmopolitanism demands a strong local culture that paves the way to form affinities with foreign cultures. When the local culture is as weak and incapable as the parents described by Chan and Lawrence, the only hope for re-establishing the incest prohibition will come from the children. But if this is the case, then there is a key difference between Eileen Chang's and Rich Lawrence's stories, because Paul is able to recover the incest prohibition, while Xiaohan cannot. This difference stems from the way in which the tradition of filial piety sugarcoats the weakening of the incest prohibition in China. This tradition allows Xiaohan to mistaken incestuous desire for paternal love, and she's never able to recognize the incestuous behavior of her father for what it is. As a result, she is unable to blame her father for the incestuous situation, and even tries to return to her father at the end of the story, trying to displace her friend Eileen Chang as the object of his affections. By contrast, without the deep influence of filial piety, Paul sees the malicious influence that his mother's behavior has on him, and makes several attempts to escape her through his relationships with other women. In the end of the story, he must kill her in the name of euthanasia in order to escape her. But if Paul is able to carry out this rebellion and Xiaohan cannot, then such a killing of the parent cannot be a universal childhood desire described by the Lord. Both stories describe the weakening of the incest prohibition as the result of a failure on the part of the parents. But it is only in Sons and Lovers that the child is able to recognize the moral weakness in the parent. Both writers critique the decline of morality in order to liberate people from inward implosion and allow them to seek a potential love with strangers and their cultures. Taking the problem of incest in their cultures, Lawrence and Chan see the enforcing of the incest prohibition as the pathway out of the confinements of repressive local cultures and towards the cosmopolitan love. By encouraging love for strangers, the incest prohibition does not just regulate family relationships, but in doing so also establishes the cognitive and cultural basis for a healthy local culture that resists inward-looking self-obsession and has enough self-confidence to be able to appreciate and engage with another culture in order to eventually leave the local with the world. That's my talk today. And I'm welcoming any questions from our audience.
That gave us so much to think about. All the notes here. Thank you so much. I'm going to also open the floor and welcome my colleague from UC Riverside, Dr. Wu, who joined us. Just noted that she had a class, and so she joined a little bit late. But I want to make sure everybody who has a question should be able to raise your hand in the virtual virtual space there, or you can type your questions in. And for our Zoom audience, I'm going to go back here to the 6th slide, so you should be able to see that, and we can here see you. Sorry, I've got 5 different screens open here. Okay, so the floor is open for questions, for discussion. We have the book here. We heard about a presentation of a quarter of it. There are 3 more really fascinating chapters. There's a lot to talk about. I'm just sort of vamping here while anybody in Zoom land wants to frame their questions. But I'm really interested in a lot of these ideas of cosmopolitanism as a kind of globalization without homogenization, and how how local cultures are maintained. But we started to talk about defamiliarization before we started, and I was interested if you could share a little bit about that idea, how that plays into comparative literature. And I know you've spoken and written about the differences between comparative literature and world literature, and the benefits of comparison in the mode that you do it, and how that gets us into a mode of defamiliarizing our own culture. How we grow from there. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question. So, when I was doing my PhD in comparative literature, and we were taught that we have the main way to do how to do comparison. So you can either do like parallel or influence, and the world literature has been also gaining momentum nowadays, like translating into English, and then I collect the anthology of very famous or like successful literature from national literature. So there are so many modes, and I've been always thinking that is there any other way to do comparison? So that's a starting point for me to think. And also you're talking about the homogenizing the hegemonic discourses, and that is also kind of like as the like background how I figure out. So the third term, I think I hope that it could be a contribution to not just comparative literature as a mode of comparison, but also it's kind of a way for us to counter this globalized homogenizing trend has been going on for decades. And in order to counter that is really not just follow world literature. I'm kind of like critiquing world literature. I like it. It's kind of making me to help me to perfect my mode, and it's kind of like a foundation for me to think. But also, I feel like world literature is also kind of participating in this homogenizing discourse, because it's just translated to English, and it's also based on particular person like editors or some professors who teach world literature, their way of perceiving which literature should be the best, and then they include that. So somehow it's also kind of becoming like hegemonizing and homogenizing. So I'm just saying, like, it's good, but maybe we could also do narrow it down to really kind of like do more substantial comparison and do more close reading to compare two authors, two texts from very different cultural backgrounds, and using this cosmopolitan love vision. And this cosmopolitan love vision is actually kind of practicing this third comparative mode as a kind of a case or example, which is saying that we're not totally abandoning the local and the specificities. We are still, kind of critiquing it, but at the same time, we are forming this affinities and attachment with the local specificities. And at the same time, we have this double vision that you also kind of like look outside to find the appreciative foreign culture to really try to understand another culture that is drastically different from your own culture, your local culture. And in that way to kind of bridge, instead of like oversimplifying the process, it's actually kind of like a transforming process to not just link, but also critiquing the local, but also try to understand the local by understanding another local culture. So that's how it's kind of like breaking this binary of China and the West, because we're having this really big conflict between China and Western ideas. I might be challenged of how do you define the West, but there is that kind of basic difference that the East and the West, the way they think is very different. And also because the history is so different. So there's some kind of like very basic differences between these two cultural systems, even I would say civilizational systems, that we are having. This is an ongoing conflict. So I feel like the mode of this new mode of comparison is not just like disciplinary issue. It's also kind of addressing the current social political issue and kind of like responding to the conflict between China. So in that way, it's kind of demilitarized, not just like we thought we were born from this lowland, we know about this culture, but no, actually not. It's only the moment that you really understand another culture and by comparison, and then you actually kind of understand both cultures.
Yeah, I like, and you mentioned the binary, and I wanted to also, I really liked how you engage with that and challenge that. But I want to also ask Jen to please jump in. You should be able to unmute, Jen.
Oh, yeah, yes, I can unmute. Thank you, Professor Moore. And also thank you for the great talk, Professor Yao. So I can understand that there's a cosmopolitan appeal for love for desire in both writers. But I also noticed that different from Lawrence, as you also mentioned, we need to compare them. There are maybe some nuanced difference. And I found that John seems more pessimistic about the idea of women gaining true autonomy over their desires, like in the end of Heart Sutra. In fact, Lady Xu, she succeeds in preventing her doctor's unethical love with her husband. So could this be connected to Zhang's own complex relationship with her parents? Given her childhood, so I'm a fan of Zhang, so I know that she aspired for a warm relationship with her parents, and I remember after she escaped from her father's home, her aunt Zhang Zhiyuan quarreled with her father, and then after they returned back to their small apartment, Zhang Eileen made dumpling with her aunt, and she feels that this moment is very heartwarming. And I think this is a very few scenario in her novels. So do you think that Zhang still expresses a longing for a traditional family structure, even though she explores themes of women's independence and argue for bodily autonomy? Thank you.
Is that Lan?
Is it Jen or
Jen?
Jen?
Okay,
Jen,
Jen,
yeah.
okay, Jen, thanks for the question. You're from UCR, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I can tell that you know a lot of details about Eileen Chang's life, right? And I would say that one thing you pointed out about the mother in Xinjing, the Heart Sutra, is very interesting figure. Actually, in my book, I didn't talk about the mother's role in the Heart Sutra. She was just depicted as like very traditional housewife. As you mentioned that if Eileen Chang also kind of longs for this traditional family relationship, we all know that her family was very dysfunctional, and she was also having like a period of domestic violence, right, imprisoned by the father and the stepmother. So I would say I usually like to kind of distance Eileen Chang's poetic self with her autobiographic self, like her real self, so that I can really kind of like perceive the text in a more objective way. And in the Heart Sutra, I really don't think there is any autobiographic elements in there, because as we know that the mother figure in the Heart Sutra is so different from Eileen Chang's own mother. who was very westernized and really open to the Western influence. She went to study abroad and also, eventually divorced the husband. So we can see that it's like a big contrast between the traditional housewife in the Heart Sutra and Eileen Chang's own mother. And you talk about the aunt. The aunt is really kind of played a very important role in Eileen Chang's life when she was in Shanghai. And eventually they just couldn't have keep the contact after she migrated to Hong Kong and United States. But yeah, the aunt was also kind of giving some kind of warmth to her life. Yeah, so it was, I would say that from the Heart Sutra, I couldn't find much of herself in there. In contrast to her later work, like, the Little Reunion 小团圆, when she's writing, really kind of like an autobiography novel. So yeah, the Heart Sutra as a fiction, a short story, I don't see much of Eileen Chang herself.
Thanks, Chen. It's a lot to think about here. I also want to open the floor for any other questions, obviously. Jump in, please.
Yeah, so when you were mentioning about the differences between world literature and comparative literature, it seemed that we want to come to a sort of cultural synthesis between cultures in order to for more understanding and with the way the world is developing and its more interconnectedness. Where does the question of cultural appropriation come into when dissecting these texts and trying to get a deeper understanding and connectedness? And if so, should there be a boundary where it's this is for us, it shouldn't be exported out? I just want to know your thoughts on that, and what were your takes on it?
So are you asking about the world literature on it, I was thinking?
Yeah, between with the homogenization question, where can that lead to cultural appropriation?
Oh, so it could or couldn't, because it totally depends on the reader. I think for the anthology of world literature, what they do is they kind of select what the editors or editors they represent, Chinese literature, Korean literature, something that they selected and they think representative, and then include into the anthology. And in that way, when the readers are reading them, it's kind of like a process, depends on the readers, I really think, that if the readers could do a recreation of the reading. So, but I would say that the anthology sometimes is not so complete translation, because sometimes they only translate part of it. So that's really kind of impeding our holistic understanding of the original text. And that's why, as a comparatist, I really kind of want people to, at least read the complete and also know the language. But I know life is short, and then that's why we have to, read the translated work. But there are some kind of problems in there. Is translation is kind of like the translator's recreation, understanding of the original work. So that could be facilitating, but at the same time impeding the reader's understanding of the text. So that totally depends on the reader, and if they could use if they have this ability to read in the the original text in the original language, then I think it's much easier for them to have this better understanding of the original text. To have a more positive cultural appropriation instead, because cultural appropriation could have negative or positive way. And I think usually we think appropriation could be a negative, because we just kind of imposing some kind of understanding to the text and generate some kind of bias.
Mhm.
But I kind of feel like, it could be positive. Even though there's a kind of beauty of this understanding. So yeah, I think it's a difficult question because like the process is so complicated, the reading process. But it's totally depending on the reader's taste, ability, and then also cultural background to decipher
And intention.
Yeah, like so complicated.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Very interesting.
And as a music major, the listener too, right?
Yeah.
The listener and
And the reception.
reception,
Yeah, that's a reception question.
great, lot to think about.
Thank you. Thank you.
I really like that in this, still in the sort of mode of defamiliarizing. I really like the idea of making an object of the culture, sort of showing the clay feet of the culture rather than being this all pervading thing that is inescapable. But instead, when you go in and you say, look, Freud was writing at the same time, he's
Mhm, yeah.
articulating, so it's very precise what Lawrence is aware of. And I think in a lot of ways, there's a precision to what Eileen, to what Eileen Chang is going to be aware of. And talking about Xiao, filial piety in a very particular way. So I like the way that sort of deconstruction of the all-pervading power of culture can take place within this form. Say, well, it's not all-pervading. There's an awareness of the specificity of Xiao and the specific thing. And it made me think of the vastness of each one of these individual traditions, so that we just get, there's a way that's limiting. If we just think of Freud, because Freud then was then writing within a much larger context,
Right.
very local, maybe
Yeah.
for Lawrence, for anybody else. And then in China, I also think of like Mozart, Tianai, like universal love, that's something that educated Chinese people to be aware of, which is one of the most radical ideas I've ever heard. And it's 2,000 years old.
Mhm.
And it's where Mozart was a Chinese philosopher, criticized Confucian filial piety, especially, saying this is the root of all evil. This is the problem. You need to love your neighbor's parents as much as you love your own parents. And your parents need to love your neighbor's children as much as they love you, and ad infinitum throughout the entire realm. So that I think there are the seeds of all of these critiques within these cultures, but then somewhere along the line, somebody says, oh, this is going to stand in for Chinese culture, Xiao, or Confucius, or something like that.
Cultural appropriation is actually, the interpretation. Because I think in the beginning, when the filial piety was, popping up, I think it was like kind of innocent. Because it was like, really like by instinct, you want to kind of respect the parents, the seniors, you want to kind of learn from them. And we used to have this like respect for the old people. And we cannot understand now we have this
Yeah.
obsession in youth culture. And we still have this tradition. And I wouldn't say it's evil. I'm totally against that. I think it's good because it's kind of like making the whole generation pass down the wisdom, and that's how we survived and pass our genes down, and also the life experiences and lived experiences. But once that it was kind of over interpretation, or it was interpreted in kind of like a specific ideology or some kind of political aims in it, then that becomes kind of like just like it was not saying all the filial piety is bad, but it could be just sugarcoat this real problem, that incestual desire, and then people would just think, oh, this is virtual, but it's not virtual. And it's actually, the problem is that the parents were not able to control the desire. So yeah, it's very interesting to see the children's desire was actually originated from the parents. Because how could children just have the desire, like Freud said? How could the children just have this desire? It definitely was influenced by someone. So it was kind of like a nurture and nature debate.
And there's such a violence in the sort of, in the globalization of Freud. And the fact that it is so specific. It is so specific to what, to what the limits of what he knew, vast mind obviously, but then you tracked in the beginning of your talk, the way in which the homogenization and the globalization of the specific in the West is such an important part of understanding the kind of sort of crushing imperialism of modernism, where Freud universalizes his own specifics. That
It's
was,
just convenient,
Yeah.
just a label to just put it there saying that, oh, this is like some kind of mastermind said that, and then we should just believe that. But you know, science could make mistakes also.
I think a lot of people are, I mean, that throughout the last century, so there's so many different challenges to Freud and you know, sort of universally accepted ideas, but they linger in a lot of ways still because of the force that they have.
It's just like using some theory to kind of like oversimplify text instead of really like looking to the text and trying to understand it. Very sincerely and genuine.
Yeah. I want to keep the floor open for questions, but I also want to talk, when I was looking at your courses, you teach a course on Sinophone cinema, and I think I'd like to talk, because I know in the realm of literary studies, the term is important. And Sinophone meaning Chinese language, broadly speaking. So I think,
Still,
yeah, we're still
Okay.
going. This is Professor Yao. And so I think the importance of using the term Sinophone as opposed to Sinophone cinema as opposed to Chinese cinema, or Sinophone literature as opposed to Chinese literature. And Shishu Mei gave a talk a little while ago about this.
This
I
would be
know
a big debate.
it used to be. Can you tell us a little bit about why Sinophone? Why is that important as opposed to saying Chinese cinema, Chinese literature?
I think it's the most important for me to use a Sinophone is because it will make me, and I hope also make my students to realize that there's not just only one mainland. Because if I just say Chinese, and it's very misleading, just all this like something from China. But as we know that there's so many people scattered around the world, and they're still using the Chinese language. So I kind of feel like it's kind of broaden the territory and also make us realize that even though it's kind of within this Chinese system, cultural system, there's still diversities. I mean, various forms depends on the specific regions these artists are living and creating their work, and also depends on the historical and political tension, geopolitical tension in there. So I think it's really kind of like offering a broader vision to understand China for the space and also for the time. Yeah, because you know, Sinophone might think like it's kind of space, but actually it's also like telling us, you know, a lot of historical rupture time, and then how it was like becoming this kind of Sinophone condition, right? So yeah, I just feel like I also like, you know, these marginalized Sinophone directors, you know, having so different perspective from those directors from, you know, Taiwan, or Taiwan I would also say, you know, belong to them. So it's like from mainland Chinese directors. Yeah, there's so all the directors within this Sinophone sphere are having very unique perspectives, even though they belong some kind of.
And today, especially with Beijing, Hong Kong, Beijing, Taiwan relations, etc.
Exactly. And I think I just like, you know, want to not, instead of like, you know, adding more tension among this region, I want to like promote, you know, to kind of mutual talk and dialogue and conversation to really appreciate each other. even though like it's kind of like still having this kind of fights, right? How do we appease each other and to not like appease is like a bad piece, but just like just sit down and to have a conversation dialogue to really understand each other. That's kind of generate like defamiliarize the local understanding.
This, I love that I think we need, again, this is from somebody in the history department, somebody from literary studies, I think always being so acutely aware of language. On that, I want to ask, because I heard you mention this in a previous talk, bias. And the way I often encounter it, especially with my students, in an academic setting, it's this thing to be erased or disposed of or run away from, or it's very stigmatized, the term. And I recognize in your work that there's you're not as afraid of bias. You're not as afraid of the
Embrace
term.
it.
Can you tell us about embracing bias and what you're getting at?
There's no to be objective as humanistic scholar. And I just feel like if there's no way to do that, I'll just try to be a human. And to be a human, I have my historical stories, I have my experiences with other people, you know, I have a history, right? And so I think it's just like kind of like claiming that I would use my own body and my own mind to really engage with the world instead of being afraid and then like, you know, just because I want to be objective, I cannot do anything and I couldn't say anything. I think we're really made of biases. Even though we claim that we're objective, Freud claimed that he is objective, but to me it's also like based on a lot of subjective cases, right? And then to kind of using his understanding to put like a kind of piece up all the systems he claimed as objective. So I think it's actually very interesting to make some claims, but I'm not saying like, you know, I make claims and I'm always right. It's like it's something that can offer me to start with. If I can just have a bias and then I'll just say, okay, right now at this moment I believe this, but maybe in a year I will be totally opposite. That happens all the time, but just because I have this kind of like, you know, personal inclination about something, my understanding, and I just kind of like couldn't engage with others. And it's just that at least bias offers me a position that allows me to engage with others and to engage with the world and to have experiences. And then I believe that experiences will help me to adjust my biases and approximate truth. So the bias is actually helping me to approximate truth, but I believe that I'm just human being. There's no way to really know the truth. But at least it's something that rich experiences I having as a scholar is very interesting step forward.
Yeah, I've heard people value in scholarship transparency over objectivity, or so transparency about my position or my perspective. And Freud came on. I should introduce Professor Campbell. I was joining us from the psychology department. I realized that we had to change the time. I know. So Professor Campbell was who does work on relationships and love in the realm of psychology. So I think when we wrap up soon, you'll still, I'm sure, have a lot to talk about. But I think this idea of bias and understanding bias, not being afraid of bias, and this sort of stigmatized way in which we use the term is important. And I like how you said continuing to learn. That I tell my students, I hope that tomorrow I'll think I was a dope today. I hope tomorrow. I hope I'll have grown enough to know that I really didn't know that much today about, you know, because I always have those moments where you sort of say, I can't believe I said that.
But the more you know, the more you just realize, oh, I'm so ignorant. I need to know more.
Absolutely. I think we've got a couple more minutes, and I want to welcome anybody in the chat to in the Zoom to ask any questions. We have 2 copies of Professor Yao's book to give away. And so if you are interested in winning a copy of Professor Yao's book, I'm going to ask you to, in the chat in just a second, to think of a number between 0 and 1,000. That makes it easy. And Professor Yao asks you to think of to maybe write down a number between 0 and 1,000. And everybody in the Zoom, if you're interested in winning a copy of Professor Yao's book, go ahead and put a number in the chat between 0 and 1,000. Any number between 0 and 1,000. I will keep an eye on the chat. All right. Stephanie and Brianna, Nicole, Genesis, Kimberly, or Adriana, jump in. If you'd like a number in the chat. Let's see, 1, 2. All right. And counting down 5, 4, 3, 2. Put your number in the chat if you haven't yet. Okay. 20. All right. Okay. And the number is
128.
128. The winners are Genesis and Kimberly. If you both will please either already had, oh, Brianna, you sat this one out because you already won a book. That was very, very magnanimous of you. I'm going to put in my email address, please. If you would like me to mail your copy, and this is Genesis and Kimberly. If you'd like me to mail your copy, please email me at that address with your mailing address, or let me know if you're planning to pick it up in the history department, and I will put a post-it with your names on it. That's Genesis and Kimberly. Okay, congratulations, and a huge thank you to Professor Yao for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I will also, if Genesis and let me make sure I got the names right. Genesis and Kimberly. I'm going to make sure I spell it correctly. K-M-R-L-Y. And Genesis, that was right, right? Okay. 2 names. So that Professor Yao knows how to sign your name.
Yes.
And she will sign your copies of the book, which is really exciting. Please join me in thanking Professor Yao for making the trip up from Orange County to join us. Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you.
is really
It's nice to
delightful.
see you all.
Thanks everybody for joining, and thank you from Brianna and Kimberly and Genesis. Go ahead. See if I can get the controls here. Yeah. Stop sharing.